we arrived at Pearl Harbor at 5:30 on the morning of the 7th. When we left Canton, and my commander was Captain Maddox. He was a Commodore, had honorary title of Commodore. Ordered him put on submarine watch, fore and aft, port and starboard. We still had the submarine watch on that morning. And at that morning, a little after 10, we spotted one of the watches spotted a submarine. So from there on back, we couldn't go very fast towing, only about five knots. And the submarine would they'd have us every once in a while to stop our engines, and the submarine would stop. And the selfies would go around us trying to find out about where they set, But by the time we got close to Pearl Harbor, about 100 and some miles out, the selfies run short of fuel, so they asked permission to go in. And so they were granted permission to go in, but they figured we were close enough to the Navy coverage from Pearl Harbor. And the conning tower was starting to show. So we notified the Navy Yard. The Navy Yard, the ward, U.S. Ward was on duty at the gate. And the Navy Yard ordered the ward to come over and investigate. Now, who decided to order him to sink that submarine? There's a little debate, but the officer that I was working for was the senior officer president afloat at the time. But anyway, we watched as they didn't call general quarters. We couldn't figure out why they didn't call general quarters. With the submarine following us all that time, and we were reporting that, they know into the Navy Yard, and the submarine within in the entrance area, we couldn't figure out why they wouldn't call general quarters. But then we realized, we thought maybe the only thing would be the difference is that before that, on Sunday morning, they had the simulated dive bombing attacks on Pearl Harbor. So we thought that was defensive maneuvers out there. But anyway, we watched the destroyer ward push those darn depth charges over, and we weren't very far away from them. We still had the tug tight. We were supposed to have been a tug there to take our tow away, and they didn't get there. So we still pulling that tow, because you don't dare stop. You have to keep moving when you got.
So the depth charges, they did sink the sub, right?
What?
The sub did get sunk by the depth charges.
Yeah, they claimed they sank it at 6:47.
Wow.
And so they wouldn't let us in the harbor. We couldn't figure out why, but I guess they figured that they didn't know how many subs there were. We didn't know at that time there was 5 of those midget subs there. And but anyway, they wouldn't let us in the harbor, so we just steamed around out there. And we were still steaming around out there when the attack. Oh, but while we was doing that, we was playing our radio, our intercom on the radio was playing music all across. It was from the radio station in town playing music all the time. So what would you think? If they're not calling general quarters, you just think it's a maneuver. Then it just sailed around out there, and then the attack started. We couldn't. We could see the planes at a distance and that, but you couldn't hear the explosions because it's a ways in from the harbor there, and we was out a little ways, But while there was bombing and that, the radio station was still playing music.
Wow.
And we couldn't figure out what it was. Then all of a sudden it broke in to say this is an air raid to take cover, and just kept saying that.
Yeah.
After the first attack, we still steamed around out there because after that attack, then the destroyers were the first out, come out pretty fast. So there's no way it's going to let us in the harbor after that. A little after 9 o'clock, the second attack came, and it was mostly high-level bombing, except I think they depth charged the Nevada that tried to get out and sank it before it got into the waterway that takes you out. So otherwise they'd have blocked that, and they could have stayed and bombed for 2 weeks if they wanted to.
Yeah.
But the Japs, of course, their target was the battleships and the airplanes. And they sank the battleships. They didn't claim they were sunk, but, you know, I was the Yeoman. When I was on the Yeoman on the Medusa, the battleship we'd get most of the repair jobs on them, and I'd have to list in every day's report. I'd have to list where we were and different things, but what the depth of the water was. And that water there was 6 fathoms. It's 36 feet where the battleship. So they sank, but they still didn't go below the water. You know, the deck was still above water. During that second attack, we were watching it. There was 8 of us on the bow of the Antares watching a dogfight up there. We couldn't figure out where we got an airplane for a dogfight. And at that time, somebody yelled at the Jap plane, and it was a zero, and he come down and he opened fire. He opened fire. We all hit the deck, but he was shooting at the bridge, and they had some damage in the radio shack, and a little damage on the bridge, but nobody got hit.
Oh, that's good.
And we never, we steamed around, and they were bombing, of course, still bombing, and we were zigzagging, and the captain figured if they hit us, he could beach us, but after that attack, then they made all of us go below. And that's when it got scary, because you get down there, the only way out of those is by a ladder, you know, and nobody could go get out of there if we got hit, because we didn't have no watertight security on the Antares, you know. But so we went on in, and they tied up in Honolulu. And when they mustered the ships afterward, we weren't there to answer muster. So there's 5 hours we was reported missing. The next morning, a little after 8 o'clock, I got a telegram from the Red Cross that my brother was in the hospital at Pearl Harbor. Well, the first thing I thought is that the Japs had hit Palmyra Island and they was injured and threw wounded back. But it turned out, I went and took my telegram into the Commodore. He had a Jeep available and a driver, and he told him to take me out there. And since I was just on that ship for temporary duty for that trip, I had to take my bag and hammock and go, and it took me back to Kuhu Island inside the harbor where our base was. But I got to go to the hospital, and my brother was an outpatient. He had yellow jaundice, so he wasn't hit or anything. But that was the worst experience for me that day, because the harbor was stinking with all the burning of the fuel oil and the water, and all the ships were hit. But inside that was, you know, a lot of the casualties in the Naval Hospital there were from burns. That, you know, the uniform of the day was shorts and T-shirt, and the fire that bombs they used and things, you know, get that fire, if it hit the skin, you burned. If you had clothes on, you didn't burn. And the casualties in there, and of course you can imagine the smell from burning flesh. And you hear the moans, and that was the worst part of it. But the Japanese only lost 29 planes and 84 men. But you know, since they didn't have general quarters, if they had called general quarters, Pearl Harbor would have been a different story. And there was all kinds of information. I mean, any military should have recognized. They figured there's 28 to 32 Japanese subs east of Midway. Now, why would they be there? I mean, if you're military at all, if you know this, then it has to be one of the factors. But the thing was, you know, we embargoed Japan, embargoed any oil or metal or anything. We allowed food to go through and things that couldn't be used in fighting. And they were, Japanese were angry enough to know they was going to do something about it.
Yeah.
But not only that, what I should have said is, early that morning at 4 o'clock, the USS Condor was a minesweeper on duty outside the harbor. And they spotted a periscope running through the water toward the entrance. And so it was their job to notify, they were on duty out there, it was their job to notify the destroyer they spotted this periscope. Well, the officer on the old ward that was a 4-stacker World War I, destroyer.
Yeah.
He hadn't been on there but just a few days, and he got started off in the wrong direction, and then when he got there, of course that sub wasn't going to be there yet.
Yeah.
He didn't see it, and he made the fatal mistake, I think was a fatal mistake, of not notifying the yard.
Yeah.
He missed his duty. His duty, not whether he saw it or not, his duty was to report it.
Yeah.
And I know Admiral Nimitz after that, when he found out, he just couldn't understand why this hadn't been reported.
Yeah.